Let's talk about the one recording principle that will set you up to get way better sound than you ever imagined, even in your crappy home studio. Let's talk about it. All right, this one principle is very simple. Set yourself up for success at every level. Now let's use a few examples so that I can flesh out exactly what I mean by this, and with this there will of course be a bunch of sub-tips. But let's start with electric guitar. You may think the best way to record electric guitar, and the way all the pros record electric guitar, which is mostly true, is to have an amp that is mic'd. And this is almost certainly the best way to record guitar in the scenario where you have a totally quiet studio that maybe is $1 million plus studio, and somebody else has set up the mic to be in the perfect position with the amp, and you're already really knowledgeable about what amp sounds you want to have because you've recorded a bunch, or you've been a band for years and you've been professionally recording, then you know all that already. And yeah, that is probably the best way to get the sound. But for you and I, there's a lot of other factors, and we're not in that scenario. You and I may be recording, let's say, in a basement, like I am, where the furnace is awfully close. So every time the furnace kicks on, it might ruin a guitar recording. And another factor, the room itself probably sounds like crap, because most of our rooms are just rooms in a house, and therefore they don't sound very good. So we don't want room noise if we can get away from it. Most of the time, for most of us, if we can record something so that the room doesn't affect the recording, we probably want that. And also for most of us, we probably can only record at times where maybe other people in our house are sleeping or just don't want to be disturbed generally, because maybe we have a job during the day, we come home at night, we're spending time with our kids and our family, and then everybody goes to bed, and then that's our time to record. If you have an amp that's mic'd, especially because amps sound best when they're really loud, you can't do that while your wife and kids are sleeping. So when are you going to record? Are you just going to wait to record only like 2 hours on a Saturday? That's not setting yourself up for success. Instead, it would be better to just do direct line in, where you don't have to worry about the room noise, your furnace can't ruin a recording, you're not worried about waking people up. So you're setting yourself up for success at every level, thinking through, okay, yeah, sure. Overall, the best would be to have $1 million studio and an amp that's mic'd. But given your scenario, it probably is better to just do direct line in. Amp software these days is great. You'll get 95% of the sound and none of the worries that you have when you are miking an amp. So that's setting yourself up for success. Other things to think about, let's say you're recording your first track. Maybe it's acoustic guitar, maybe it's piano, but normally you would record to a click track. That's sort of the default. But a click track is very robotic and just is very hard to play to, because most of us aren't used to that. Unless you're used to playing to a metronome, then maybe you'll be fine with it. But for most of us, playing to drums is much easier, and we're going to be more successful. We're just going to play better and with more feel, which is what we want. We want to elicit a good performance out of ourselves. So thinking about how do I get the best performance out of myself is another thing we have to think about. So for instance, for me, that means that even if it's a really simple drum track, like kick, snare, snare, kick, snare, snare, which is literally just a click track basically, but with the sounds of a drum instead of the sounds of click, 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 click. That makes a huge difference for me. I play way better. So I'm thinking about how to set myself up for success. Chances are, unless you're used to playing to a metronome, you're going to be similar. And even if you are used to playing to a metronome, you probably would play better to drums. So think about maybe just even having a basic drum beat that you program, that you initially record to. Later you can have a drummer come in and record real drums that are actually good and all that, but just set yourself up for success with your performance. Same thing vocally, by the way. It may be the case that you actually get the best vocal performance out of yourself if you actually get rid of all the instruments except the acoustic guitar, or the acoustic guitar and the piano, or the bass, drums, and the electric guitars. But you get rid of all the harps and the flutes and all the other stuff you have. Whatever gets you to sing best in the moment, just mute the instruments that you don't need. For example, one of my friends, he says he actually records vocals best when he just does the piano and gets rid of all the other instruments. So he gets rid of all the other instruments and just listens to the piano when he's recording vocals. Do whatever it takes to set yourself up for success at every level. Speaking of vocals, because vocals, let's be honest, are the most important. Perfect scenario is you're alone in a studio and it's $1 million and the room sound is amazing. But a lot of us don't have that choice. So we have to make choices like, do I just deal with the bad room noise in my room and record like that? Or do I set up a bunch of blankets and record in a closet maybe, where the sound is maybe too dead, but hey, at least I'm not going to have room noises? Or do I build myself a vocal booth or buy a vocal booth? Which, by the way, I ended up building myself a vocal booth. And the purpose of that was exactly what I'm talking about here. Set yourself up for success at every level. I knew that to be successful vocally, I was less worried about the room noise or anything when it came to vocals. My biggest concern is I want to be able to record vocals whenever my voice is ready, whether it's midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, at an inconvenient time when people in my house are asleep or my neighbors don't want to be disturbed. And I know that for me personally, I'm going to have a better vocal performance when I'm not worried about people hearing me and judging me, and what if I go for that really high note and my wife 2 floors above me is like, ooh, he didn't quite hit that right, did he? All of that, not that she thinks like that, but like just that like mental thought holds me back vocally. So I designed the vocal booth to be mostly about containing the noise and keeping the outside noise out. So now when the furnace turns on, even though I'm in the basement and the furnace is right there, it's not screwing up vocal recordings. So that's one really important part. Also, I can record at midnight, and not only am I not gonna wake up my wife and daughter or tick off my neighbors, but I also know that even if my wife is hanging out just 1 floor away, she still can't hear me, so I don't have to be in my head about like, oh, I have to sound good and I can't try this thing vocally that might sound really bad because I'm going to embarrass myself. And you may think, hey, Joseph, you should just get over that. And you're absolutely right. I should. But here's the thing. That's my reality. That is my reality. I am going to perform better with the vocal booth. I have performed better with the vocal booth. I now can record at midnight, which, by the way, I almost exclusively record music when my entire family is asleep, which is just a wife and daughter at this point. But they're asleep. For like 95% of what I've ever recorded was while they were asleep. That's something you can't do if you are in an apartment and you only have one room next to where your spouse is sleeping or your kid is sleeping, and you're miking an electric guitar amp, or you are singing without a vocal booth that contains the sound. So think about how to set you up for success with your scenario. Yeah, we can talk about for days and weeks what the best way to record things are. That's not important. What's important is what's the best way for you to get success with your recordings, whether it be the best performance you can get out of yourself, which is an important element, or the best sound you can get. And just to wrap this up, I want to give you the quick, for like 95% of you, and this includes me, this is how I do it as well. What is the best way to get results? The best sound you possibly can get, assuming you have a room that sounds like garbage and you're just recording in your basement and your furnace is right there and you don't want airplanes to ruin your recording. So for most of us, you just have a room in your house that you have to record music. How do you get the absolute best sound that would blow people away that you recorded at home? Here's the answer. Do everything in the box that you can, except for the 2 things that I think you really need to mic. Vocals, of course, right? Of course you need to mic vocals. And acoustic guitar. Acoustic guitar, theoretically, you could do direct line in. It sounds like crap. Don't do it. It's much better to have an imperfect room with the acoustic guitar that doesn't sound quite right, or, you know, deal with a few takes being destroyed because the furnace came on at the wrong time. By the way, you can just shut your furnace off for the 2 hours you're recording as well. Another thing to think about. But acoustic guitar and vocals are the 2 things you absolutely must mic. There's no getting away from that. Don't try, just do that. When it comes to electric guitar and bass, do direct line in and utilize amp software to get the amp noises, the delays, the distortions, the compression, all that stuff that you want later, because that's going to be the best way to get the best recordings. Your furnace won't be able to screw them up. You can record late at night. It sounds great. It sounds at least 95% as good as a really professional studio with a perfectly mic'd amp and all of that. Then drums. Drums, either program them or have somebody record them with an electric drum kit. Yes, most electric drum kits are not as good as the acoustic ones. But you and I probably aren't very good at miking a drum kit. We probably don't have a good room for it. We're gonna deal with bleed. Our drummer might not also be that good, and we need to fix a lot of their tempo issues and hit issues. If you have recorded audio with drums, it's really hard to fix that in post if they were really off for one section. I'm assuming here you're not a drummer. So it's just better to just record it with MIDI, with an electric drum kit, use decent drum sounds that you either pay for or a free virtual instrument that sounds pretty good. There's a lot of great ones out there. And then you can edit it to be as perfect or not perfect as you want, but you can change it in post and it's not a big deal. Maybe you're a purist and you think, no, can't do that. But like, do you want the best recording or not? And if you're not a drummer, it doesn't really matter, right? If your whole thing is drums, then yeah, you don't want the drums to be fake. You want it to be a real performance that actually represents you. But for most of us, if you're a guitarist and a vocalist, you want the vocals to be real and you want the acoustic guitar to be real. If there's some great violin part that a violinist didn't really play, who cares? that doesn't really matter. Which, by the way, for all orchestral instruments and everything like that, almost certainly the best thing to do is to use one of the great free virtual instruments out there. Just do it with MIDI. Don't bother trying to get somebody to come in and record violin and mic it and all that. Giant pain in the butt. Don't do it. Not worth it. Lots of free stuff out there, or paid stuff that sounds incredible these days. So go with that. And then finally, I think the only one we haven't talked about is piano. Have a nice weighted keyboard, like the Yamaha weighted 88 key keyboards that are like $400. Perfect. Record it with MIDI. It's great. And then there's tons of free piano plugins that sound amazing. There are tons of paid ones that sound even more amazing. There's lots of incredible ones for like $60. Just pick one of those and you'll get great sound. And again, you can have piano recordings that sound amazing. If you missed one note, you can just sort of fix it, which is nice. And then also you don't have to worry about room noise or any of that because it's just MIDI. So you're setting yourself up for success. So again, big picture when it just comes to the best way to get recording sound to be as good as possible, which is only one part of this, right? You want to get the best performance out of yourself, as we talked about as well. But you need a mic for vocals and you need a mic for acoustic guitar. Just find the best way to make it work, whether that be recording in a closet with blankets or pillows or whatever it is to get the best sound that you can get. Direct line in for bass and for electric guitar, and then use MIDI for everything else, basically. Drums, piano, all that. So the only thing you should need a mic for is acoustic guitar and vocals. And you will get the best sound, much better sound than you ever imagined in your terrible home studio that has awful sounding room and all that. You would be amazed at the sounds that you can get. So keep this one principle of setting yourself up for success at every level in mind, and you will blow yourself and probably others away with the incredible sound you can get even out of your home studio that is just some random room in your house. And on the note of setting yourself up for success, this is a principle that I apply to lyric writing as well, because a lot of times people just try to improvise poetry and then they wonder why their lyrics suck. And the answer is because almost nobody is so talented and skilled at poetry writing that they can just improvise poetry off the top of their head and it be really any good at all. Certainly not great, and certainly not consistently great. So how do we set ourselves up for success lyrically? Is to break down lyric writing into a process with steps. I specifically have 6 different steps. They're all much smaller, easy to complete, and set ourselves up to consistently pump out lyrics that we can be proud of. Be sure to check that out, songwritertheory.com/lyric checklist. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. Go out and get some great recording done. I'll talk to you in the next one.